So good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. Hope you're doing well today, and thanks for taking the time to join us this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ermal Luzaj. I head the construction group at Saks. So thank you again for joining us. A lot has happened over the past 3 to 4 months, and a lot of it has been outside of our control, and we're all trying to wrap our heads around it and get some answers to a lot of the questions that have come up. A lot of meetings I've had with clients, everyone has had a lot of concerns about what's going on in the industry, and specifically with their bonding and banking situations, and how the banks and the bonding company are going to view a lot of the PPP loan and a lot of the other things that are happening. So hopefully we can shed some light into that today. You'll have an opportunity to submit your questions. There's a question box on the dashboard, and we'll save that for the end of the discussion. So you can submit your questions, and then at the end, we'll save about 5-10 minutes for questions from the audience. We'll also send an email of the recording today, so within 24 hours. So before I introduce our speakers, I just want to share a few things with you. There's a disclaimer there. The purpose of the disclaimer is so that the gentlemen today who are going to give us their opinions and advice on a lot of these items are not familiar with every specific situation. So if anything specific comes up, you're free to contact them directly or speak to your accountant, banker, or bonding company directly. Just to give you a few Saks updates, even though it's been a tough first half of the year, we've been very happy with things that have happened from a Saks standpoint and what we have accomplished. I'm very proud of our Saks construction group. We're named one of the top 50 construction accounting firms in the country. The overall firm is one of the top 100 firms in the country, and our wealth management group is also number 29 for firms by assets management in the country as well. Forbes magazine also gave us America's best tax firm. So these are all things that we're very proud of. In addition, in April, we did a joint venture with Safari Solutions. I would say the timing on that, we had planned on that for a few months, and the timing couldn't have been better because with the whole COVID-19 happening, we were able to provide our clients with a lot of technology solutions, such as the working from home, cybersecurity, doing all that. So that has been very successful. Another item that we started doing since, I believe, March or April, since when especially the PPP came out, we've been holding recovery updates. So we've had set up a task force that is doing updates on a weekly basis. So typically we do that. You can go to our website, but every Thursday we have a webinar where the team on the recovery group, on the recovery task force, is discussing a lot of the things that are happening. The environment is changing almost on a weekly basis. There's a new change, there's a new rule every week. So they're discussing all that, talking about the PPP, talking about forgiveness, talking about different tax rules that are impacting the PPP and all that. So feel free to go to our website and join one of those webinars. They're free. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can email anyone on that team or anyone outside of that team to get the answers. So I just want to introduce our speakers today. As I said, our conversation today, I've talked to a lot of clients and I've talked to a lot of professionals in the industry, and I feel like a lot of the topics have been geared towards the operational side of the business because of the difficulties that they've had. But a lot of clients are concerned about the financial aspect of it. They haven't gotten a lot of guidance from their bonding company or their bank, and they don't know they're looking for answers. And so we figured that today's conversation will be geared towards the financial aspect of the COVID-19 impact and how that will affect the contractors from a banking and bonding standpoint. So our speakers today, we have Scott Brackenbury. He's the New York Regional Contract Manager for Liberty Mutual, and Bill Ruckert, who's a Senior VP at Provident Bank. Both of these gentlemen are well known in the industry. They handle a large amount of contractors. They have their finger on the pulse when it comes to these issues. And hopefully we'll get all the answers that you're all looking for. So the pressure is on you guys. So I want to get started with some of the questions today. And like I said before, any questions that you have, feel free to send them through our in the question panel, and then we'll answer them at the end of the year, at the end of the program. So I want to start with Scott, on this question. We've been through almost 4 months of this pandemic. Scott, what have you guys seen with your client base? What are some of the top concerns that your clients have going through this? And what has been your response to that? And any indication that things are getting better or worse? Like what are some of the things that your clients are concerned about?
Well, I mean, obviously it's so soon to really understand what everything's going to look like. But the concerns early on were just the availability of work, right? There was a lot of uncertainty with regards to when some of the jobs that our contractors had would start back up again. So that was the main concern early on for the first, call it month of the pandemic. And then once things started to kind of even out a little bit, it became clear that not every sector of construction was going to be impacted the same way. From a work from a work perspective, there are certain types of construction that really kept going, never stopped throughout the pandemic. And then there were other types of construction that were shut down for an extended period of time. So I think the main concern short term was just the work availability and when they could get back to it. There's a lot more that we'll talk about during the course of this presentation that are longer term concerns. But when it first all happened, I think everyone was just worried about, can I generate the revenue necessary to cover my overhead? That was the short term kind of problem or concern that everyone had. And again, it really looks like it's a sector by sector type of conversation, depending on the kind of contractor that you are. So that really was those were the early conversations. And now since then, we've gotten into, what 6 month statement's going to look like, what the year end's going to look like, and other things that we'll talk about during the course of this conversation. But really, it was just about, can I generate the necessary revenue to cover my overhead, given the fact that some of my work is not up and running right now? That would be the immediate concern from my perspective that I saw a few months ago.
Yeah, a lot of contractors went into this survival mode where they were I just need to survive the next 2 or 3 months. I just need to get past this, and then we'll deal with everything after that. But have you guys seen a lot of bonds being requested during this time, Scott? Or
no, unfortunately, because that's what we do for a living, and that's how we pay our bills. We're down. Our operation, which probably generates about $100 million a year in top line revenue, we're down probably 15 to 20% right now, and that's a direct result, quite frankly, of New York City. Ermal, we read a heck of a lot of bonds out of New York City. That's a big bond user. That's one of the biggest bond users in the entire country, I think, behind the state of California. So we have a lot of contractors that operate in New York City. And New York City, for an extended period of time, had a very vibrant construction program. Every major agency that existed out there had a significant capital allocation towards it, whether it was the SCA, whether it was NYCHA, whether it was the MTA, whether it was DDC, whether it was DEP. There was a tremendous amount of money being spent on New York City construction in all segments, in all areas. When the pandemic hit, there've been quite a few of the city agencies that completely shut down, where people aren't going to work, where people aren't, having plans be let, having, jobs go forward. So there's, if you look at the SCA, the School Construction Authority, for example, which is a significant owner, they're essentially idle right now. The Housing Authority, same thing. There's a lot of jobs that if it's just a city-funded job, they're not moving right now. And from a future work perspective, New York City has basically shut down all bids. So there's your concern right there. If we want to talk about concerns, I mean, as New York City goes, so does the region, right? I mean, a healthy New York City means a healthy regional economy. It means higher housing prices. It means more infrastructure spending outside of the city. It just has a ripple effect beyond New York City in terms of New York City being healthy. So if you don't have a healthy New York City and you don't have things going well from an economic perspective, whether it's bonds or construction or anything, it's going to have a trickle down effect onto all areas of construction. So, we're down specifically because of the city spending programs. New Jersey has never been or has not been great from a public works perspective for a long period of time. That there's a fuel tax that they implemented a couple of years ago, right? We all know about the fuel tax. Yeah. The fuel tax is kind of correlated to how much people fill up their tanks, right? So if you're not driving and you're not filling up tanks, you're not generating the revenue necessary to fund construction. So New Jersey took a hit also. Not that it was a very strong public sector program, but it took a hit because of the pandemic based on a lack of revenues. Now, fortunately, there's been legislation that's been passed recently by the governor of New Jersey where they're going to increase the tolls on the Parkway and the Turnpike, which, as a citizen, I'm not very happy about. But from an overall construction perspective, they're going to put a heck of a lot of money into construction on a go-forward basis. So you talk about bright. I don't want to be all, negative about the economy because there are some bright spots. It could be a good future from a New Jersey perspective in a sector that's really been downtrodden for a long period of time, Ermal. So we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed that that's going to be something that we can kind of latch on to from a bond perspective also.
And what about the private sector? Have you seen any indication on the private sector?
Well, private sector was very strong in Jersey. There's a lot of private investment in Jersey, so that continues. I don't see anything negative there. Not a big bond user, like from a bond perspective, they didn't. That was not something that we did a lot with. I mean, a lot of the bonds that we generate are from public sector bonds, so that's what we do and what we see. From a private sector, New York City, again, they're gonna have a problem because the condo and the high-end apartments were kind of waning even prior to COVID-19. So that was not a very strong sector. There was some spending on the high-tech companies in New York City, and there was some high-rise activity also. I think given the current set of circumstances that are occurring in New York City, both from a social perspective and an economic perspective, I don't know how much investment capital is going to be attracted into New York City, for the short to near term. So I'm concerned about New York City, not just from a bond perspective, because I don't want to be selfish, but I'm concerned about it because New York City is the hub of the world. And if you're not attracting capital, you're not attracting people to come in and to invest and to build, that's going to be an issue. So New York City is going to have a problem. But from a pure construction standpoint, that's where you saw some of the problems from a COVID-19 perspective, right? Where high-rise jobs were shut down, and then they started back up again, and new rules and regulations were instituted with regards to access to the actual projects, and how many men could be on a floor, and lift elevators and things like that. So you want to get specific about COVID-19 impacts as it relates to construction. I think New York City private construction in particular got hit hard because there's a lot more things that are going on now from a rules and regulations and lack of efficiency perspective.
Scott, we lost you there. Scott? I think we lost Scott. Scott, we'll get back to you in a second. I can't. I think you got a bad connection there. Speaking of capital, I think that's a very important hurdle that has come up recently. But speaking of capital, I want to turn the conversation to Bill. And Bill, we had the biggest, as I was telling someone, I've never worked as hard as we did during that PPP time, and I'm sure you guys worked triple as hard as you normally would, just trying to deal with the whole PPP, I'll call it debacle at the time. People trying to figure out how to apply, how to get the money, how do you qualify for the money. What have you seen? How did the banks end up with dealing with that? Why wasn't it done directly through the SBA? And what do you see out there with your clients and how they're dealing with the whole process?
Well, Ermal, I mean, the rules have changed from the moment that they were released, and the banks, not to bring any politics in this, but the banks got thrown in front of the bus by the government and kind of led people to think all you do is run to your local bank and they had a check waiting for you. Maybe that's overly simplistic, but it's kind of how the way it played out. The questions that we're receiving from them now, and by the way, 100% of the people that applied to us for PPP money got it. So it was a fire drill, but the fire drill was handled, in my view, quite well. What people also don't understand, by the way, is that the money that went out is bank capital. It's not the government's money, so we're relying on the government to pay us back, especially on the forgiveness side. So now the big question is, how do I apply for the forgiveness? And as you pointed out earlier, that process has not been finalized. The SBA is not ready to take these applications on a full-blown basis. And then the questions start coming from the customers, well, how do I treat it on my balance sheet? How's the bank going to look at it? And when can I apply? We, Provident Bank, are not in a position to be the expert on how to answer some of those questions. All we can do is give you guidance as we know it. And, we think probably waiting till the money is gone and you've got your paperwork in place is the time to apply. But there's going to be a lot of issues associated with that debt on the balance sheet, its impact to covenants. Clearly, the financial results of the companies are going to be impacted by it as well, and hopefully it will meet the ends that it was designed for. But that too is yet to be decided.
Yeah. So, can you guys hear me, by the way, now? Because I know I had a little bit of an audio issue. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
now?
we can hear you now.
Right. Perfect.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so Bill, when that, a lot of the clients have, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's probably some lack of information out there, but everyone is looking for answers as to, when do I apply? Let's say if I've used my eight weeks or I use the whole amount of the forgiveness, and do I wait my 6 months or do I just go ahead and apply now? And the other question is, we have a lot of clients who took more than $2 million in PPP loans. And as the SBA came out and said that they're going to actually review specifically those loans over 2 million. How is that process going to work? And who is doing the review? Is the bank doing the review, or is the SBA doing the review? Do I apply to the SBA first, then to the bank, or do I submit it to the bank, then the bank kicks it to the SBA, and it comes back to me? And how long is this going? I know I'm asking you like 20 questions in one shot. These are the questions that people that people want, because I get emails every day about I'm ready to file for forgiveness, and I'm like, just hold off, but
Okay, so let me see if I can knock them out one at a time, Ermal. So if the money's spent and the company can validate that it met the requirements for where that money was going to be spent, those companies probably should start considering applying for their forgiveness. As I mentioned, I don't think the SBA is geared up for the deluge of applications coming in. I can tell you Provident Bank expects to go live by the end of the month and begin taking applications the first week of August. We are using a third-party provider to do it. So we, the banking industry, and that third-party provider to a large extent, it's clerical in nature. There's going to be a checklist of information that is required in the application. Let me back up for a second, though. They're pushing hard for the under $150,000 PPP loans to not require even an application. So if someone took under $150,000, I'd sit tight and wait for that automatic forgiveness. As you know, these rules are changing every week, if not every day. But they're pushing hard for the 150 to be a seamless process. Nevertheless, if you need to apply, the application coming through the portal is clerical. All we're doing is making sure everything required is there, and the SBA is the decision maker. The banks do not want to be the decision maker. It's a bad position to be put in. You have a client that thinks everything should be forgiven. Their banker says, well, we don't think it's all of it. And where does that leave that relationship? Not in a good place.
Right.
But then there's the timing aspect of it too. The banks have 6 to 8 weeks, I believe the timing is, to process the application. And then the SBA has another 3 months to approve it or not approve it. So, those loans are going to be sitting on most companies' balance sheets at year end. I don't think the SBA is geared up, manpower wise, to process those applications in a timely fashion. With regard to audits, so many of you have dealt with the SBA. I don't know how they're going to do the audits. If they try to push that down to the banks, there's going to be great pushback. Again, we don't want to be in the middle of something that was, at lost for a better term, shoved down our throat. And remember, this is my opinion. It's not the banks. Yeah, we don't want anything to do with those audits.
Yeah. So when it comes to the SBA audits, have you gotten an indication how are they going to be lenient with them? I mean, there's a lot of fear out there that they're saying, well, the SBA is going to come in and any loan over a certain amount, either they're going to try to knock down the amount forgiven, or you're not going to get forgiven at all. And that's a big concern for a lot of clients, because I've talked to a few clients that got a lot more than that, and they said that we really needed this money to survive, and the purpose of the money was to be used to keep your employees, in the company, still employed, even though they may have not had the work or been coming to work at all. So now to come in and tell someone, well, you can take the money, and now to say that, well, we're not going to forgive it, even though the terms of the loan are very favorable. It's 5 years at 1%. I don't think any bank will loan money at those rates. You still have to pay it back. So that could be an issue. So have you got any indication from the SBA on how lenient are they going to be, and who's the third party doing are they other accounting firms, or are they how's that process actually working?
So another 10 questions in one, right?
Yeah.
Well, for the people that applied, well, let me back up to go forward. So on the construction side, I generally deal with infrastructure from the Connecticut markets into Eastern Pennsylvania. And while Pennsylvania got shut down altogether, the contractors that Provident Bank does business with really didn't get terribly impacted by COVID. Their biggest disruption was in the workforce. But they applied. And the application itself said, if there's uncertainty in your business, you should apply. So from an application standpoint, and the math that you could use to apply, I think they had every justification to apply. Everybody. I can't think of a business that didn't have some uncertainty for COVID. Okay. And just to back up on that 5 year at 1%, when we signed on, it was 2 years at 1%.
Yep.
So,
Minor change.
yeah, minor change, right? But no, we've been given zero guidance about how those audits are going to be performed, what they're going to look for, how stringent they're going to be. None.
So most likely your expectation is these loans are going to sit on people's balance sheets, at least the bigger loans, at the end of the year.
I believe they will, yes.
Yeah. Now, from a, and correct me if I'm wrong, but now it seems like everyone got the loan, whether you're a large or small contractor or any business really got the loan. The question is it fair to say that every business failed at loan covenants because you got a loan that actually, if you actually read your bank line agreement, it specifically tells you that you're not allowed to take out a loan. So you probably failed your loan covenant just by taking that loan. Is that a fair statement?
Well, every covenant's a pretty broad statement, but a lot of covenants are going to get failed. In some cases, we did have clients ask for the waiver for third-party borrowing, so that provision in the loan agreement was complied with. But if you fail a covenant because of the PPP loan sitting on the balance sheet, and you have adequate cash flow to support debt service, who cares?
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Now, Scott, how do you guys, so obviously, how do you view the PPP money that went to all the contractors? Is that something that is viewed favorably, or did you think that was a lot of help for a lot of your clients?
Yeah. I think almost every one of our contractors got PPP funding. There's no question about it. Some needed it more than others, for sure. But whenever you can extract extra liquidity and put it on a balance sheet, from my perspective, it's a good thing. It's a low interest rate loan. It may be at some point part of the capital base of the contractor if it's forgiven. And so we'll find more out about that as the year goes on with regards to if they can keep the money or not. But just short term, it was a great bridge to get over this uncertainty that was COVID-19, right? So that was, I think every surety would be happy about the fact that there's an influx of capital if you were smart enough to access it. And it's a low interest rate loan that may or may not be paid back. So, it took away a lot of the short-term uncertainty that was surrounding COVID and construction early on. And so there's really not a lot of negatives there. If you look at the construction marketplace, I haven't seen anyone go out of business because of lack of liquidity, and that has all to do with the PPP funding. So I think it served its purpose, Ermal, short term. I think it bridged the gap. Longer term, we'll have to figure out, what the balance sheets look like, and if there's a forgiven element to it, which would be good or not. But purely from a liquidity perspective, it was a huge positive from where I sit.
Yeah, another thing with the PPP which was very favorable at first, was that the government came out and said the PPP money is not taxable. So that was great, except for then again, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, the IRS came out and said, fine, the PPP loan is not taxable. However, the expenses that you use to offset or to forgive related to the PPP loan are not deductible. So that's going to be an issue, towards the end of the year, because I guess the question is, for us, from an accounting standpoint, we're going to treat the PPP loan as a loan until you actually get a letter from the bank that says that your loan is forgiven. Right. However, from a tax standpoint, if what Bill is saying is right and the forgiveness letter doesn't come out until 2021, so now how do you treat it from a tax standpoint? And if the rule doesn't change, those expenses would have already been incurred in 2020. So there's a little bit of confusion there, not on how that's going to impact everyone. Now, hopefully, they come out with some rule that says you can actually deduct those expenses, because I don't think the government's intent was to give people a loan and then make them pay tax on it, right? The whole intent was to give you money, use it for payroll, keep people employed, and then we're going to forgive it, right? With no tax impact to you. So that's going to be interesting. But going back to what you were saying, so they're going to have this debt on the balance sheets. Obviously, you're going to see a lot of balance sheets upside down, and you're going to be getting, I've seen a lot of June 30 financials that, certain clients are probably not going to see a huge impact, as you mentioned, a lot of infrastructure guys, but there's some balance sheets that are going to be upside down. You're going to have a ton of debt. Maybe they have liquidity, but you're going to have a ton of debt. And, how is the bonding company going to look at that?
Well, we haven't seen any 6-month statements yet. We're still waiting on some year-end statements, actually. But
there's a reason for that, Scott.
Yeah, I know. I mean, everyone was running around with the PPP program, so we all understand why that's the case. I don't think, I think any good surety company won't overreact to a balance sheet that's upside down, as you say. If you understand surety and you have a good relationship with your contractors, even if you get a surprise or you get a bad looking balance sheet, there's rationale behind it, and it's no one's going to knee jerk. At least we're not going to knee jerk. We're going to talk it through and try to be good partners and understand what the second half of the year looks like. That's what a good surety company would have or would actually do. So that's kind of the way we're going to handle it. And I agree, there's not going to be a lot of balance sheets that are upside down, because honestly, other than New York City, I keep getting back to New York City because it's such a huge part of what we do. Other than the New York City public and private contractors, and not every one of them either, I think a lot of contractors, will be okay from a 6-month statement perspective. Keep in mind, going into 2020, everyone had a great backlog. It was a good time to be a contractor, right? There's a lot of construction. Margins were up in almost every sector, whether it was utility, whether it was GC work, whether it was water work, whether it was, name any segment of construction. And I think people were experiencing an uptick from a gross profit margin perspective. So, entering 2020, people had a lot of cash, they had a lot of capital, they had good backlogs. So, I'm not expecting a significant amount of red ink or problem type of situations from a balance sheet perspective, based on how good things were going entering the pandemic. I'm more concerned about the next couple of years versus the first 6 months of what already happened. Because I think we can quantify that and we understand what happened. I'm more interested in what the next few years look like, and how contractors are going to react to a changing marketplace.
Yeah. So are you saying that you could get a 6 months? Because we've had a few clients that opted for, instead of doing a 6-month statement, because they were concerned that it wouldn't be financial picture wouldn't be too good, to do a August 31st or September 30 statement that would have at least 3 months of actual work in there that could actually show. I guess everyone was afraid to send a financial statement to their surety company showing that, let's say, they lost $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that $1 million was funded by all the PPP money, but
Right.
because it's not forgiven, it's sitting on the balance sheet. So now you have $1 million loss. And the biggest question is, what's the impact on the margins, right? Because, and a lot of people don't really know what the impact is. I had a client last week telling me that it's a big GC. They're working on 4 different buildings in New York City. And he would say, typically we're on the 40th floor. I would take 40 guys, send them up there and just do the work. Well, now it takes me 2 hours to get them up the elevator because I can only have 2 guys on the elevator. So he kind of started spreading them, and then you can only have a certain amount of guys in the same floor because they got to be X amount of feet apart. So there's going to be some kind of loss in productivity and margins.
Yep. I think you're right. I think vertical construction in New York City really is where you're going to see the biggest impact.
Oh,
Scott, we lost you there. That will, Scott, I'll jump to Bill, and then we'll get back to your question. Bill, so I guess staying on the same topic, are you expecting certain balance sheets to be upside down? Is that look favorably from the bank if the client has a loss? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I had a conversation with a bank 2 weeks ago, and they told me that one of them said, we're looking at 2020 as a one-time hit, which whatever your result is, we're not going to base our decision whether to stick around with you based on your 2020 results. As long as we understand the impact, you could even have a loss, and we're going to be fine with it. And I spoke to another bank that said, well, I can tell you that by the end of the year, the bank is going to have less clients that they had at the beginning of the year, right? That's a powerful statement. So now, when it comes to construction and real estate, I mean, those are not some of the hardest hit industries. So because you have the hospitality and the restaurants are hit harder, but how are you guys, and how's the banking world in general going to look at that, at the financial results for 6 months and year end, if there is a loss, let's say?
so the loss in and of itself, I don't think is the real issue there, right? I mean, the industry, the construction industry in and of itself has favorable conditions with banks and unfavorable. I mean, it's the proverbial cyclical industry that banks come in of and get out of, and generally don't stay consistent in its lending posture. That being said, as you heard as you just described in those two conversations, each bank is going to be different. Each banker is going to be different. I think the bigger banks will take the more macro approach, and the smaller banks will take a more micro approach, right? It's more of a relationship banking with the community and a regional banks than the money center banks, where it's at loss for better description, a cookie cutter kind of environment. If you trip a bunch of covenants in a big bank, I'm not sure you're going to have that relationship manager, acting as an ambassador from you to the bank or from the bank to you. So, Scott was talking about 21 and thereafter. I mean, yeah, I think 20 is going to be, one-off. Having a loss doesn't necessarily mean you need to run from the company. The balance sheets are secondary sources of repayment. But if you have a bad year, or you're having a bad year, and whether it's COVID or not, you need to be talking to your banker. And if you're going to trip covenants, you need to be talking to your banker so that they can represent you to the people they report to. And perhaps they're going to need a credit enhancement. So if guarantees aren't there, maybe you need to get them. And if you don't, I understand a business owner doesn't want to give a guarantee, but if that makes it work, then that's what you need to do. And if you have to negotiate the guarantee, maybe a burn off or a liquidation or a step up or a step down, then that's what you have to do. And those conversations have been going on for years, regardless of what the cycle is. The thing about COVID, though, is I'd like to think that we're a cure away from this issue subsiding and back to we were in 2019. It's got, again, it said most contractors had a very good 2019. In fact, most of the clients that I work with all had a very good 2019. Give us a cure and let's go back.
Yeah. Right. And I would just add from a surety perspective, it's kind of the opposite. I think if you're with a bigger surety company that's been a surety company for a long time, that's been operating for years and years, and you have a long-term relationship, that's critical through any crisis, whether it's COVID or anything, a bad job, a bad owner. I mean, bad things happen to good contractors. I worry that there's been an influx of small bonding companies that have sort of hit the scene over the past 5 or 6 years that have really tried to gobble up a lot of the market share. And there's really no history to how they're going to operate or how they're going to react to someone having a bad year. And I always say surety is all about relationship. It's about numbers for sure, and it's about balance sheets. But at the heart of what we do, it's about knowing who your contractor is, trusting them, understanding them, and that only happens with a long-term relationship, right? And all these smaller companies that are just experiencing a downturn now, it'll be interesting to see how they handle red ink, both from a 6-month perspective and a year-end perspective. I think there's a little uncertainty there, which kind of speaks to having a good partner is really everything from a surety bond standpoint. So it's an interesting time right now for a lot of bonding companies that probably bond a lot of smaller contractors that maybe didn't apply for the PPP loan and don't have that big capital base to bridge the gap to get them through to 2021 and beyond. So that's the kind of picture that I'm looking at right now from a surety marketplace perspective.
Scott, when you were getting cut off there, actually, someone had a question that was that you got cut off, but they wanted to get you're talking about what your thoughts are on the vertical markets in New York City. So then you got cut off. So someone asked the question. Maybe you can finish that.
Okay, so my comments on vertical construction, all I was saying was basically, as it relates to the construction, the gross profit margins on existing work and on new work, what I was saying was, of all the sectors in the region, I see vertical construction in New York City, and it's very similar to what you just said. That's the sector that I think will be impacted the most by the new COVID rules and regulations, right? Whether you are returning to work on an existing high-rise building, your margins are going to be impacted based on the new work rules surrounding, how many people can be on an elevator, lift, or on a floor, things like that. And even on the new work, we're really preaching to all of our vertical contractors in New York City to make sure that with future bids, those bids capture the COVID-19 rules and regulations that will have to be in place to build in New York City. And that's my concern is margins will go down as a result of the lack of work in New York City from a vertical construction perspective. But don't make it worse. Don't compound it by not integrating the new work rules and regulations from a COVID-19 perspective into your bids on a go-forward basis. That's kind of just making a bad situation worse, I guess, from our standpoint.
So I'm assuming that you guys would scrutinize a bond request from a contractor who is involved in certain trades versus others. At least you'll be a little more concerned about.
I wouldn't say scrutinize. I would just say that we're talking to all of our contractors, so we know exactly what their plans are, how much work they have on hand. And again, it gets back to the fact that a lot of contractors have great backlogs even now to carry them through 2020. So I'm not worried, honestly, about 2020 from a volume standpoint. There will be a dip in volume, from call it March until May for many of our verticals and many of our GCs. But by and large, a lot of those contractors had great backlogs entering 2020. So they're going to be fine once they get back to their work, which they have been for the most part. But I'm more worried about the future prospects for work for these contractors going forward and what they should be doing about what could be a very bleak landscape as it relates to New York City, whether it's vertical construction or any type of construction work. Because I'm of the mindset that the next few years in New York City will be very, very tough on contractors because of the way that the way New York City is being managed now, and the lack of focus from an economic perspective on COVID. No one's really taking that part of it seriously from where we sit. So there's going to be a dip in work opportunities as we move forward. So we're really, looking to have our contractors understand that, and then, be have a good game plan from a fixed cost perspective. If they run into a situation in 2021 where there's not a lot of work, where there's a dip from a margin standpoint, what can they do? Can they cut fixed costs? What steps?
Scott, you got cut off again. We'll come back. We'll come back to you. Bill, I just wanted to, kind of getting back to what Scott was saying with respect to what the impact of COVID, especially in the New York City and the New Jersey markets, and especially the commercial real estate market, which I feel like it's one of the hardest hit sectors when it comes to office space. We have a lot of contractors who work in that field, whether they're electrical or HVAC, a lot of the different trades. Have you seen an issue with that? Is the bank, well, see, I look at that from a demand standpoint, where you see companies looking at the ability to work from home, and they're saying, well, I don't need this, 50,000 square feet of office space. I'll just be just fine with 20,000 or 30,000. So do you see an issue with that from a demand standpoint, but also then from you guys lending to developers who want to buy a building and develop it and rent it out?
So I think, no different than what Scott was saying before. It's know your customer. I mean, if we get approached by someone who wants to do a spec office building, I think the answer to that request is pretty easy. The office space market is clearly going to change. To what degree, I'm not sure, but it's going to change, as is the retail market. But I mean, we're still seeing, we're seeing a fair amount of developers for single-family homes. That market has seemed to come back a little bit. But if it's a stretch deal, no one's going to do it, right? I mean, we've been here before. We are in a recession, whether they want to call it that or not. So what do? You pull back, but you support the customers that you've been working with for so many years, as Scott was talking about, the larger surety guys. We've been here before. It's a little different, the circumstances, but I don't think the dynamics of how you react to it change all that much. The subcontractors you're talking, the electrical guys, the HVAC guys, Ermal, those companies have always been a challenge for banks. Generally, their capital base is less than a GC. And to some degree, they're relying on the GC. And I mean, we've all been in conversations where you see a GC snickering that he's going to squeeze the subs to get that job after he gets it, So lending to the subcontractor market is especially a thinly capitalized company, that's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, that's one thing that we have noticed throughout this process, that the banks have certainly tightened up. I mean, they haven't thrown out any current clients yet, but they're not really. I mean, we've sent out a few deals to banks that typically, if you send out that deal in January or anytime last year, the deal would have been done without a whole lot of questions or issues and all that. Now we're either getting radio silence, or we just can't do it, or they're asking for a lot. So the question is, are banks still lending?
Again, I think that's bank by bank. I can tell you Provident Bank is still lending. We are a well-capitalized bank even before COVID, and we're still a well-capitalized bank. We haven't had earnings out for second quarter yet, but they'll be out in a couple of weeks. And I expect we're going to be impacted, but I think we're going to continue lending despite what's going to go on. Now, can that continue? Well, you talked earlier about the IRS's treatment of the PPP money. So what do you think is going to happen to banks? We're making deferrals to accommodate some of these companies that, hopefully temporarily can't make their payments. And the Fed has said to the banks, you should not have to classify that as a criticized loan, so you don't have to increase your reserves for it. The regulator said, that's not true. We're going to classify and we're going to make you increase your reserves, taking away capital, which cannot be used to lend money out. There's clearly going to be some companies that are going to not survive. So the capital base of companies are going to be impacted. So do I think banks are in the market to lend? I think some are. Wells Fargo, unfortunately, had to cut their dividend last month, at the end of the right before the net earnings announcement for second quarter. I suspect when a company cuts its dividend, it's an indication that maybe they're not going to lend money, but that's just my speculation. So there's going to be disruption, Ermal. To what degree? I don't know.
Yeah, we have a lot of customers who are not happy with their banks, especially with the larger banks. The problem is they're trying to move away from the larger banks, mainly from a service standpoint, how the PPP loan was handled and all that. But now they're trying to move to other banks, and they're finding a lot of hurdles that they got to go through to just get a line of credit. Whereas the existing customers, the challenge from the existing customers is that they're looking for a little more direction on how the bank is going to look at things. But I believe the banks don't really know themselves what to do and what kind of decisions will be made. And I mean, I know we talked about it last week a little bit, but you mentioned something about there's a lot of people in this industry, whether it's accounting or surety or bank, that have never been through a recession.
Did I say that?
Right? Yeah, you did say that. So, but that's very interesting. So elaborate a little bit on that.
I'm 60 years old. This is my fourth cycle. I came out in '82. Prime was 18%. Difficult time to come into banking or business in general. So if you're 40 years or younger, you came into the workforce in 2005 or thereabouts. You've not been through a recession. And if you've been in the workforce for 15 years, so there are some very high-ranking people in the banking world that have to make some decisions or have to provide guidance that, quite frankly, this is all new to them. Now, the COVID aspect of this is new for everybody, but how you handle your loan loss reserves and how you handle customers and make sure the documentation's in place and working with your customers, that aspect's not new. Scott, we talked, like you said, we talked about this like weeks. Scott agreed. This is not new for us. But for those people who've never done it before, it's very new. And the communication here cannot be overstated. The banker needs to be talking to the business owner and vice versa. And if that business owner is not having communication with the banker, or doesn't like what he's hearing or is uncomfortable with what he's hearing, he needs to go up the food chain and find someone, hate to say it, with gray hair that's been there before. Because that is the best way to resolve the problems. You have to have open lines of communication. Look, if there's a borrower who doesn't want to pay you back, well, the communication in the world is not going to help you. But I am of the opinion that most of these business owners who are struggling from COVID, they want to pay you back. We've got a couple of clients outside construction industry. They've been in business for 40 years. They have no revenue. Their business is shut down. They're going to lose, potentially they could lose everything. Do you think it's important that we communicate with those people? 100%. All week long.
Amen.
As I tell everyone, the bank is not interested in taking over your business or your house. They want you to make money so that they can get paid back. They're not in the business of holding real estate. So
right, 100%.
Bonding companies too. Same idea. Bonding companies. Yeah, we don't want to own anyone's house. We want to make sure that people make money and have good lives and good futures for their families. So that's the core goal of everyone on this call, I think, is for that to happen, for sure.
Now, Scott, are you seeing anything from the bonding standpoint that are you guys waiting to see how, let's say, if you have a situation with a client where things are not maybe going great, are you waiting to see how is the bank going to handle it? Let's say maybe getting a waiver if they fail the covenants before you make a decision on giving them more bonds or how to move forward with that customer?
I think it's part of the conversation, Ermal. I don't think it's everything. If someone's struggling, and we're very blessed that we don't have a lot of people in our portfolio that are struggling, but if you're struggling, that will be a key question. It's not going to be the only litmus test, if you will, that will kind of let us know or figure out how to handle a struggling contractor, but it will be a component of it. I mean, access to cash, liquidity is key. Like I said earlier, the PPP funding for a contractor that was struggling was like a bank loan. If you didn't have bank access or you had very limited bank access, and you were a large company that employed a lot of people, and you accessed the PPP program, that was your bank line basically. So there's going to be people with bigger balance sheets from a cash flow perspective. But going forward, we do want contractors to have sizable or fair bank lines to support everyday needs from a cash perspective. And if there's no liquidity access beyond what's on the balance sheet.
Scott, we lost you again. You gotta get a new internet service provider. We'll get back to you. I see we're at it's 10:55. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to post them on our chat. But in the meantime, I don't see any questions there yet. But I'll ask, I guess, one final question to both of you guys. As far as where do you see the end of 2020, maybe 2021, with everything that's going on besides COVID, but also a presidential election coming up? Is that going to have any impact? Do you, without getting too political, because nowadays you can't, but do you think there will be an impact one way or another because of the outcome?
Scott, I'll let you go first. Oh,
yeah,
maybe not.
Conveniently, his internet doesn't work.
Right. When you throw the election in there, Ermal, it's kind of hard to not bring politics into it, right? I mean, you there?
Yeah, I don't want to, it's just, do you expect a lot of uncertainty, I guess what I'm saying, things still being up in the air until we have some kind of closure on how the election is going to turn out? And then do you expect things to kind of move forward on a more, call it, normal level? So are the next 3 months, 4 months kind of up in the air, and people are just going to wait and see from a standpoint of, do I make an investment, whether it's in the market or whether it's in some kind of job or project, until I see what's going to happen after the election?
So again, I'm on the infrastructure side. So I think the infrastructure, those contractors are, frankly, it's business as usual. Unfortunately, they're eating into their backlog, and there's not a plethora of new work coming out. Having said that, there's talk about another big federal stimulus package coming out of Washington, and I think either party has to support that. Scott also mentioned about the gas tax in New Jersey. I mean, they're obviously not generating the revenue that they once did, because people aren't driving their cars. So DOT is not putting a lot of work out, but there's other opportunities out there too, right? The Port Authority is putting work out, fair amount of work out. The new Turnpike Authority is going to put work out with the toll increases. There's still private sector work for utilities. That's going to continue. Certainly, water has to continue to upgrade. So there's work there that I don't think the election plays a role in. But the eating into the backlog and not being able to build it for the contractors that I talk to, that's probably the biggest concern of all.
Scott?
Yeah, I would see it the same way. Short term, the only bright spot from an economic perspective is the stock market, because that seems to, it's not really linked to really what's going on Main Street right now, because of the Federal Reserve pumping the amount of money they pumped into the economy. So if you look at the stock market, you're kind of scratching your head saying, how is this happening when everyone's kind of struggling from a Main Street USA perspective? So that could be a false sense of security there. I don't think things will get better after the election. I just, we've lent a lot of money. We spent $3 trillion. We're going to spend more money. So at some point, overall, from an economic perspective, there will be a day of reckoning. But I agree with Bill. There will be a stimulus program. They will have to do something from an infrastructure standpoint. Infrastructure is one of the bright spots in our portfolio now. New York City, you're a Long Island contractor, a New York State contractor, a Jersey contractor. There's a lot of bright spots, going forward, in that sector. So I'm optimistic about the heavy civil side of what we do, because this whole region is massively in need of investment from an infrastructure standpoint. So we have to have it. I think you saw where the Gateway project was green-lighted by Trump with the governor of New Jersey recently, which is going to be a great shot in the arm from an economic perspective. There's a lot of bigger, higher profile jobs on the heavy civil side that are still out there. And if you get the federal funding from a package standpoint, it'll be a good time from a go forward perspective to be a heavy civil contractor for sure. It's the other trades that I worry about a little bit.
Okay. I have a few questions here. I know we're probably running out of time, but we'll maybe take another 5 minutes to answer some of these questions. Somebody's asking, if the SBA does not render a decision on the forgiveness by the end of the year, and we assume the loan should be forgiven, can we include the loan proceeds in operations? I mean, from an accounting standpoint, until you get that forgiveness letter from the bank, I don't see how you include that in operations. So you may end up with a situation where, and that's why my question before was, how is the bank and the bonding company going to handle a situation where you may have a loss, but it's a loss that's strictly due to the fact that you have all these expenses related to your loan, and a loan is sitting on the balance sheet because you don't have forgiveness yet until the following year. So you may have a situation where your expenses are all falling into 1 year, and then 2021 you're going to have a loan forgiveness where you pick up this, $3, $4, $5 million of other forgiveness of debt income that's going to make 2021 look a lot better than what it is. So I don't see how, I don't know what you guys are thinking, because that ties into another question where someone's saying, how are you looking at that loan from a bonding perspective, from a working capital perspective? Are you saying, well, that's a loan, but I'm going to discount it because there's a high, it's going to get forgiven, so I'm just not going to.
No, we won't do that. We won't do that until we see exactly what happens, because it's going to be a case-by-case basis. I don't think the federal government's going to come in and just wave a magic wand and waive everyone's loan. It's going to be based on certain criteria, which seems to change every week, right? So we don't know what that looks like. So until the criteria is set and until we have certainty around if a loan was ultimately forgiven or not, it's going to be a loan. Now, it's a very friendly loan from a terms and conditions perspective, for sure, but it's a loan. So, it's not going to increase your net worth calculation. It's not going to increase your working capital calculation. It will increase the cash that's on the balance sheet, hopefully, if it's still there. And that's a positive, but it's really not going to do much in the way of a bigger surety program or more capital until it's ultimately forgiven by the federal government.
As a practical matter, though, Ermal, your year-end 12/31, if you apply in the next 30 or 90 days, the timeline from the bank to process and the SBA to process kind of fits in with the issuance of the financial statement. So subsequent event disclosure should deal with that, and the surety or the bank should be able to make the adjustment when the statement's when they receive the statement.
Bingo.
One more question, guys. Are you seeing contractors moving to remote work permanently to reduce fixed costs? And what the future of that is?
I've not seen it. I can jump in. I've not seen that yet. I know we have a lot of our contractors that are back at work, back in their offices. Very few of our contractors were actually in New York City, right, or Manhattan. So a lot of them were in the outer boroughs or in Jersey, in the suburbs of Jersey. So they have their own. So we don't see a lot of movement from a stay-at-home perspective, other than maybe those first couple of weeks that when COVID first hit. You did see a lot of stay-at-home activity then, but certainly it's waned significantly as time has gone on. So I don't see that as a go-forward trend from my perspective.
And interestingly enough, Ermal, while the work from home learning curve is flattened to some degree, there are some industries that are convinced they are more efficient by having everybody together. I think the construction contractors, I think they like to have that collaboration in their offices.
Yep, I agree. All right, I think it's 11:04, so we're past our time. So thank you guys for a lot of good information here. I'm sorry we couldn't answer every single question here. Maybe we'll do another webinar to answer some of these questions. But a great place to ask some of the questions, especially the ones I saw a lot of questions related to the PPP. You can join our webinar, which is every Thursday at 10 o'clock, and they essentially cover all the questions related to the PPP loans. I didn't want to take too much time explaining that here. So thank you again, and stay healthy and have a good rest of the summer.
Thank you very much.
You too.
Take care.
All the best.